The recruitment officer's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the digital file on her holographic display. Lieutenant Sarah Chen sat across from her, perfectly composed in her crisp uniform, dark hair pulled back in regulation style. 23 years old, fresh from the academy with test scores that broke every record in the system's database. But it wasn't the scores that made Commander Voss's hands shake. It was the code name buried deep in the classified sections of the file. A name that shouldn't exist anymore. A name that belonged to someone who had been declared dead 15 years ago. "Tell me about your family history, Lieutenant," Commander Voss said, trying to keep her voice steady. The recruitment office aboard the orbital station felt suddenly cramped, despite its generous dimensions and panoramic view of Earth below. Sarah's expression remained neutral. "Both parents died in a transport accident when I was 8. Raised by my aunt on Mars Colony, 7. Standard orphan track through the education system." Her voice carried the practiced tone of someone who had recited these facts countless times, but Commander Voss had access to files that went deeper than standard background checks. Much deeper. She knew that Sarah's aunt had been Maria Santos, a woman with no biological connection to the Chen family, a woman who had appeared on Mars with perfect documentation and a young girl, just as the galaxy's most wanted war criminal had vanished without a trace. "Your combat simulations are remarkable," Voss continued, studying the data. "Tactical thinking that surpasses officers with decades of experience. Almost as if you'd been trained from childhood." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I've always been good at strategy games." The holographic display showed simulation after simulation where Sarah had achieved impossible victories against overwhelming odds. Her techniques bore striking similarities to the legendary tactics of someone known only as Ghost 7, a human operative who had single-handedly turned the tide of 3 major battles during the frontier wars. Someone who had made the alien hegemony fear a single human more than entire fleets. Ghost 7 had been the most decorated covert operative in human history, and simultaneously the most wanted criminal. Depending on who you asked, she was either humanity's greatest hero or its most dangerous traitor. She had stolen alien technology, assassinated hegemony leaders, and broken every law of warfare in pursuit of human survival. When the peace accords were signed, her own government had marked her for termination. She had disappeared completely, leaving behind only whispered legends and a galaxy forever changed by her actions. "The posting you've requested," Voss said carefully. "The Deep Space Reconnaissance Division. That's unusual for someone fresh from the academy. Most recruits want safe assignments near Earth." "I prefer solitude," Sarah replied. "And I've always been fascinated by what's beyond our borders. Beyond the borders, where Ghost 7 had operated for nearly a decade, fighting a shadow war that most people didn't even know existed, where she had learned alien languages, mastered their technology, and developed the skills that made her legendary." Voss pulled up another file, this one showing Sarah's psychological evaluations. The results were concerning in their perfection. No trauma markers from losing her parents. No attachment issues from being raised by a non-relative. No signs of the emotional scarring that typically came with her supposed background. It was as if she had been trained to pass these tests. "Your instructor noted something interesting in his report," Voss said, finding the relevant passage. "He said your knowledge of alien cultures and technology seemed unusually comprehensive for someone with no off-world experience before Mars." For the first time, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. A brief flash of something dangerous passed through her eyes before the mask slipped back into place. "I read extensively, but Voss knew that wasn't possible. The information Sarah had demonstrated knowledge of was classified at levels that even senior officers couldn't access. Information that only someone with direct contact with alien technology would possess. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Maria Santos, the woman who had raised Sarah, had possessed skills that no civilian should have. She had taught the girl languages that weren't supposed to exist in human databases. She had trained her in combat techniques that weren't part of any official curriculum. And now, 15 years later, a young woman with Ghost 7's eyes was sitting in a recruitment office, requesting assignment to the exact region where the legendary operative had last been seen. "I'm going to approve your posting," Voss said finally, making her decision. If her suspicions were correct, Then humanity was about to face its greatest test yet. The peace with the hegemony was fragile, built on agreements that many aliens viewed as temporary. Intelligence suggested that several species were already preparing for renewed conflict. If Ghost 7 had returned, if she had spent 15 years training a successor, then perhaps humanity still had a chance. "Thank you, Commander," Sarah said, rising from her chair with fluid grace that spoke of years of combat training. "Lieutenant," Voss called as Sarah reached the door, "a word of advice. The deep space sectors can be dangerous. Trust your instincts out there. And remember, sometimes the greatest service to humanity requires actions that official policy cannot sanction." Sarah paused, her hand on the door controls. When she looked back, her eyes held depths that belonged to someone far older than 23. "I understand, Commander. Sometimes legends are born from necessity." As the door slid shut behind her, Commander Voss stared at the holographic display showing Sarah's file. At the bottom, in the deepest classified section, was a genetic marker that confirmed her worst fears and greatest hopes. Sarah Chen was the daughter of Ghost 7, and if the intelligence reports were accurate, the hegemony was planning something that would require every advantage humanity could muster. The young woman who had just left her office might be their only hope of survival. Voss deleted her access logs and encrypted the file with codes that only 3 people in the galaxy possessed. Then she sent a coded message to a contact who operated in the deepest shadows of human intelligence. The message was simple. "The Ghost has a daughter, and she's going home." The deep space reconnaissance vessel Pathfinder cut through the void like a silver needle, its experimental stealth coating absorbing sensor sweeps from a dozen different alien detection grids. Sarah stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display as they approached the edge of mapped space. 6 weeks had passed since her deployment, and already her crew looked at her with a mixture of respect and unease. Captain Morrison had initially been skeptical of having a fresh academy graduate assigned to his elite reconnaissance team. That skepticism had evaporated during their first encounter with a hegemony patrol. While his veteran crew had frozen in indecision, Sarah had calmly directed a series of maneuvers that not only avoided detection, but left them positioned to gather intelligence on alien fleet, movements, contact bearing. 27 Mark IV, reported Ensign Park from the sensor station. Configuration unknown. It's not matching any known hegemony designs. Sarah moved to the sensor console, her fingers dancing over controls with an ease that belied her supposed inexperience. The display resolved into something that made her blood run cold. The ship was massive, easily twice the size of Earth's largest dreadnoughts, but its hull bore markings she recognized from childhood nightmares. "Captain," she said quietly, "we need to maintain maximum stealth and observe. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt communication or approach." Morrison frowned. "Lieutenant, that's not standard reconnaissance protocol. We're supposed to make first contact with unknown vessels." "That's not an unknown vessel," Sarah replied, her voice carrying an authority that made the bridge crew instinctively straighten. "That's a Void Reaper. They're supposed to be extinct." The name meant nothing to Morrison, but it sent ice through Sarah's veins. The Void Reapers had been the hegemony's most feared enforcement arm during the frontier wars, ships designed for one purpose: the complete annihilation of rebellious worlds. Ghost 7 had encountered them twice, barely escaping both times. But intelligence had confirmed their destruction during the peace negotiations. Yet here one sat, fully operational and bearing fresh scarring that suggested recent combat. "How could you possibly know about extinct alien vessels?" Morrison asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Sarah cursed herself for the slip. "Classified briefings," she said smoothly. "Some of us received additional intelligence training before deployment. It wasn't entirely a lie. Maria Santos had indeed provided additional training, though it had taken place in hidden caves on Mars rather than official classrooms. 15 years of education in alien psychology, combat tactics, and survival skills that no academy could provide. The Void Reaper began moving, its massive bulk turning toward their position with predatory grace. Sarah's hands flew over the navigation controls, inputting a course that would keep them hidden in the sensor shadow of a nearby asteroid field. "Lieutenant," Morrison warned, "you're exceeding your authority. Captain, with respect, if that ship detects us, none of us will live long enough to file a report." Sarah's fingers found a hidden panel on the console, one that shouldn't have existed on a standard reconnaissance vessel. The ship's stealth systems responded with capabilities that made Morrison's eyes widen. "What the hell kind of modifications does this ship have?" he demanded. Sarah realized too late that she had accessed systems that were supposed to be invisible to anyone without the highest security clearances. Systems that Ghost 7 had helped design during her final missions for human intelligence. "The Pathfinder has experimental equipment," she said carefully. "Some of it requires specialized knowledge to operate." The Void Reaper passed within 1,000 kilometers of their position, its sensors sweeping the area with methodical precision. Sarah held her breath as the alien ship's detection grid washed over them, but the modified stealth systems held. The massive vessel continued on its course, disappearing into the void beyond. "Track its heading," Sarah ordered. "We need to know where it's going." "Again, Lieutenant, you're not in command here," Morrison said, but his protest lacked conviction. The past 6 weeks had shown him that this young officer possessed knowledge and instincts that his 20-year career couldn't match. The sensor data painted a disturbing picture. The Void Reaper was heading toward the contested border regions, areas where human colonies existed under the fragile protection of the peace accords. But more troubling was the ship's trajectory, which would take it past 3 specific worlds that had been marked as strategically critical by human military planners. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice tight with urgency, "I need to access the quantum communication array. This information has to reach Earth immediately." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "Lieutenant, I'm starting to wonder if you're really who your files say you are." The bridge fell silent. Sarah felt the weight of 15 years of carefully constructed identity pressing down on her. She could maintain the facade, follow protocol, and watch as humanity sleepwalked into another war. Or she could reveal enough truth to save lives. "My files are accurate," she said finally, "but they're not complete. Some things are too dangerous to put in official records." She moved to the communication console, her fingers finding access codes that predated her birth. The quantum array responded to authorization sequences that theoretically didn't exist, opening channels that connected directly to the darkest corners of human intelligence. The message she sent was brief and encoded in a cipher that only 3 people in the galaxy could decode. But its implications would shake the foundations of human leadership. Void Reapers active. Hegemony preparing for renewed conflict. Ghost 7 protocols may be required. Confirm deep black. Authorization. The response came within minutes. A simple acknowledgement that carried the weight of worlds. Authorized, proceed with extreme prejudice. Protect humanity at all costs. Sarah closed the communication channel and turned to face Morrison. His expression told her that he had understood enough of what just happened to know that his reconnaissance mission had just become something far more dangerous. "Captain," she said quietly, "what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that could get us both executed for treason. But if we don't act, humanity might not survive the next 6 months." Morrison looked at his crew, all of whom were staring at Sarah with expressions ranging from awe to terror. "Speak freely, Lieutenant. At this point, I think we're all past the point of normal protocol." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the words she was about to speak would change everything. 15 years ago, a human operative known as Ghost 7 disappeared after stealing technology that could turn the tide of any war. The hegemony has been searching for that technology ever since. Now they're moving Void Reapers into position to begin systematic destruction of human colonies, until someone gives them what they want. She paused, meeting Morrison's eyes directly. "I know where that technology is, and I know how to use it. But retrieving it will require breaking every treaty humanity has signed, violating our own laws, and quite possibly starting a war that could destroy our species." The bridge remained silent for long moments before Morrison spoke. "And if we don't retrieve it?" Sarah's smile was cold and sharp, carrying echoes of a legendary operative who had once made the galaxy tremble. "Then the hegemony will destroy us anyway, one world at a time until they find what they're looking for." "What are your orders, Lieutenant?" The question hung in the air like a live explosive. Sarah realized that Morrison had just acknowledged her true authority, recognizing that whatever she really was, she outranked everyone on the ship. "Set course for the Kepler Nebula," she said, "and prepare the crew for combat operations. We're going to steal something that doesn't belong to us from people who aren't supposed to have it. As the Pathfinder changed course toward the most dangerous region of known space, Sarah felt the weight of her mother's legacy settling on her shoulders. Ghost 7 had saved humanity once by becoming its greatest criminal. Now her daughter would have to do the same. The Kepler Nebula writhed with electromagnetic storms that played havoc with ship sensors and turned space itself into a maze of shifting colors and deadly radiation. Sarah stood in the Pathfinder's modified cargo bay, surrounded by equipment that officially didn't exist and crew members who were beginning to understand they were no longer part of a standard reconnaissance mission. "The radiation levels are off the charts," reported Chief Engineer Torres, his weathered face grim as he studied his instruments. "Whatever's hidden in there, it's been cooking in stellar radiation for over a decade." Sarah nodded, her attention focused on a holographic map that showed the nebula's interior structure. Hidden within the swirling gases was a facility that her mother had built during the final months of the Frontier Wars, a secret installation where Ghost 7 had conducted research that the peace accords had deemed too dangerous to continue. The facility was designed to be self-sustaining. Sarah explained to the assembled crew, "My mother needed a place where she could work without interference from either human or alien authorities. The radiation provides natural shielding against sensor sweeps." Captain Morrison crossed his arms, his expression troubled. "Lieutenant, you keep referring to Ghost 7 as your mother, but according to official records, Ghost 7 was declared dead 15 years ago." "Official records say a lot of things," Sarah replied. "Most of them are lies designed to protect classified operations. My mother didn't die 15 years ago. She retired. There's a difference." She activated the holographic display showing the crew detailed schematics of the hidden facility. The structure was massive, built into a dead asteroid and powered by controlled fusion reactors that tapped the nebula's energy. But it was the facility's purpose that made the crew exchange nervous glances. "This is a weapons development laboratory," Ensign Park said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the kind that's banned by every treaty we've signed." "The hegemony never honored those treaties," Sarah said coldly. "While we followed the peace accords, they continued developing new ways to kill us. My mother realized that humanity needed an insurance policy. She manipulated the display, showing weapon designs that defied conventional understanding of physics. Energy weapons that could punch through any known shielding. Stealth technology that rendered ships invisible to all forms of detection. Most disturbing of all, biological agents specifically tailored to alien physiology. "This is genocide-level weaponry," Morrison said, his voice tight with horror. "The kind that could wipe out entire species." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "And right now it's the only thing that can save humanity from extinction." The Pathfinder shuddered as it entered the nebula's outer edge, its hull plating groaning under the assault of charged particles and electromagnetic interference. Sarah moved to the navigation station, her fingers finding controls that shouldn't have been accessible to someone of her rank. "Following this course," she said, inputting coordinates that existed nowhere in official star charts. "The path requires precise timing to avoid the worst radiation storms." As they penetrated deeper into the nebula, the crew began to understand the true scope of what Ghost 7 had accomplished. The route Sarah was following required knowledge of stellar mechanics that took decades to master, timing calculations that demanded superhuman precision, and an understanding of the nebula's internal structure that could only come from years of careful observation. "How does she know all this?" Torres whispered to Morrison. The captain had been wondering the same thing. Sarah Chen's official file showed a bright but inexperienced officer, with no special training beyond the academy standard. Yet she was navigating one of the most dangerous regions in known space with the confidence of someone who had made the journey dozens of times. "Because I grew up here," Sarah said, overhearing the whispered conversation. "Every summer vacation, every school break, my mother brought me to this place. She taught me to fly in these radiation storms, to read the energy patterns, to understand how the nebula thinks. The facility appeared on their sensors like a ghost materializing from the storm. It was larger than anything the crew had imagined, a complex of interconnected modules and laboratories that sprawled across the asteroid's surface. But what caught their attention was the activity level showing on their instruments. "Someone's home," reported Park from the sensor station. "The facility is fully operational. Power generation at maximum levels, multiple life signs, and—" She paused, her face paling. "Captain, I'm reading weapon signatures. A lot of them." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the nebula. She's been expecting us. The communication array crackled to life, filled with interference from the electromagnetic storms. Through the static came a voice that made Sarah's heart skip a beat, a voice she hadn't heard in 6 months but had dreamed about every night. "Well, well," the voice said, carrying a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold professionalism the crew had grown accustomed to. "My little ghost finally comes home. Permission to come aboard, daughter. We have work to do." Morrison stared at Sarah in shock. "That's Ghost 7? That's my mother," Sarah confirmed, her own voice softening with emotion she rarely allowed herself to show. "And she's been preparing for this day since the peace accords were signed." The docking bay doors opened, revealing a facility that defied every expectation the crew had formed. Instead of the sterile military installation they had imagined, they found themselves looking at what could only be described as a garden. Flowering plants from a dozen worlds created a riot of color that seemed impossible in the depths of space, while carefully maintained ecosystems provided fresh air and the sound of running water. But it was the woman waiting for them that commanded their attention. Maria Santos stood perhaps 5.5 feet tall, her graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes showing the casual efficiency of someone comfortable in her own domain. She looked nothing like the legendary figure the crew had imagined, more like someone's favorite aunt than the galaxy's most feared operative. Until you looked at her eyes. Her eyes held depths that spoke of things seen and done that would haunt lesser minds, of decisions made in the darkness that had shaped the fate of worlds. "Welcome to my retirement home," Maria said as the crew disembarked, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested origins far from Earth. "I'm afraid the accommodations are somewhat Spartan, but privacy was more important than luxury when I designed this place." She embraced Sarah warmly, and for a moment the legendary Ghost 7 was simply a mother greeting her daughter. But the moment passed quickly as she turned her attention to the rest of the crew. "Captain Morrison," she said, extending her hand, "I've been following your career. Your actions during the Proxima incident showed exactly the kind of thinking we need for what's coming." Morrison shook her hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard physical labor and the subtle scars that suggested a lifetime of violence. "Ma'am, I have to ask, are you planning to restart the war?" Maria's laugh was bitter. "Captain, the war never stopped. It just went underground, and now the hegemony is preparing to finish what they started 15 years ago. The only question is whether humanity will be ready for them." She led them deeper into the facility, past laboratories filled with technology that seemed decades ahead of anything in the human fleet. "The Void Reapers you encountered are just the beginning. Intelligence suggests they have at least 12 more ships hidden in deep space, along with biological weapons that could sterilize entire worlds. And you have the means to stop them?" Morrison asked. Maria paused at the entrance to the facility's central laboratory, her hand resting on a security scanner that required both palm print and retinal identification. "Captain, I have the means to do much more than stop them. I have the means to ensure that the hegemony never again considers humanity a viable target for conquest." The laboratory doors opened, revealing wonders and horrors in equal measure. Weapons that could crack planets, stealth systems that bent space itself, and in the center of it all a device that hummed with barely contained energy. "What is it?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew. "Insurance," Maria replied. "The kind that ensures mutual destruction on a galactic scale. The hegemony wants to play with extinction-level weapons, then they'll discover that humans wrote the book on mutually assured destruction." Morrison stared at the device, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're talking about threatening the entire hegemony with annihilation." "I'm talking about ensuring peace through the only language they understand," Maria corrected. "Fear. The same fear they've been using to control this galaxy for centuries." She turned to face the crew, her expression serious. "The question now is whether you're willing to help humanity claim its place as an equal power in this galaxy, or whether you prefer to remain victims of someone else's ambition." The choice lay before them, terrible in its simplicity. Help Ghost 7 complete her work and possibly save humanity, or maintain their moral high ground and watch their species burn. Sarah looked at her mother, seeing both the woman who had raised her and the legend who had saved humanity once before. "What do you need us to do?" The laboratory hummed with activity as Maria Santos worked alongside her daughter and the Pathfinder crew, their movements synchronized by years of hidden preparation and weeks of desperate necessity. 3 days had passed since their arrival at the secret facility, and the cosmic clock was ticking toward humanity's potential extinction. "The quantum resonance chamber is calibrated," reported Torres, his engineering expertise pushed to its limits by technology that seemed to operate on principles beyond human understanding. "But I still don't understand how this thing works." Maria looked up from the central device, her hands stained with exotic materials that glowed faintly in the laboratory's artificial light. "It doesn't work on human principles," she explained patiently. "This technology is based on hegemony science, specifically their understanding of dimensional mechanics. I've been reverse engineering it for 15 years. The device she had built defied easy description. At its core was a sphere of crystalline material that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, surrounded by arrays of field generators that twisted space itself into impossible configurations. The air around it shimmered with barely contained energy that made the crew's instruments scream warnings. "The hegemony calls it a reality anchor," Sarah said, her voice carrying knowledge gained through years of education that no human institution could provide. "It locks a specific area of space-time into a predetermined state, making it impossible to alter through conventional means." Captain Morrison studied the readouts with growing unease. "And what exactly are we locking into place?" Maria's smile was cold and sharp. "The continued existence of approximately 40% of hegemony space. The device creates a quantum entanglement between their core worlds and our trigger mechanism. If they move against humanity with extinction-level weapons, their own worlds simply cease to exist." The implications hit the crew like a physical blow. They weren't just building a weapon. They were creating a doomsday device that held entire civilizations hostage. The moral weight of it made several crew members step back from their workstations. "That's genocide," Ensign Park whispered. "We're talking about killing billions of innocent beings." "And they're talking about killing all of us," Sarah replied, her voice carrying none of her mother's warmth. "The hegemony doesn't recognize the concept of innocent beings when it comes to humans. We're vermin to them, a pest species that needs to be controlled or eliminated." Maria activated a holographic display that showed intelligence reports gathered over the past 15 years. Images of human colonies reduced to ash, records of systematic biological warfare designed to target human genetics, plans for the complete sterilization of Earth itself. "This isn't about revenge," Maria said quietly. "It's about survival. The hegemony has been planning our extinction since the moment they agreed to the peace accords. They saw our rapid technological advancement as a threat that needed to be eliminated before we became strong enough to challenge their dominance." The display shifted to show current hegemony fleet movements. Void Reapers were positioning themselves near major human colonies, their weapons charged and ready. Biowarfare ships carrying diseases specifically engineered to target human physiology were already en route to Earth. The timeline for attack was measured in days, not months. "How long do we have?" Morrison asked. 72 hours, Sarah replied, checking the quantum communication array. "That's when the Hegemony Council meets to authorize the final phase of their operation. Once they give the order, it will be too late to stop them through conventional means." Torres looked up from his instruments, his face pale with exhaustion and stress. "The quantum field generators are online, but the targeting system needs precise coordinates for every hegemony core world. We're talking about mapping quantum signatures across half the galaxy." "Already done," Maria said, producing a data crystal that pulsed with its own internal light. "I've been collecting this information for years, using deep space probes disguised as civilian research vessels. Every major hegemony world, every military installation, every government facility that matters. It's all here." She inserted the crystal into the central console, and the laboratory filled with a three-dimensional map of hegemony space. Thousands of worlds appeared as points of light, connected by quantum threads that showed the relationships between different systems. But what caught the crew's attention was the pattern of targeting markers that appeared over specific worlds. "You're targeting civilian populations," Morrison said, his voice tight with horror. "I'm targeting their leadership structure and military capability," Maria corrected. "The civilian populations are collateral damage, just as our civilians will be collateral damage when they deploy their bioweapons against Earth." Sarah moved to stand beside her mother, her expression resolute despite the magnitude of what they were planning. "The device can be configured for surgical strikes against specific targets. But the quantum entanglement field isn't precise enough for that kind of selectivity. If we want to ensure the hegemony leadership is eliminated, we have to accept that innocent beings will die. The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of exotic machinery and the distant whisper of the nebula's electromagnetic storms. Each crew member was grappling with a choice that would define not just their own futures, but the future of humanity itself. There has to be another way, Park said desperately, some alternative that doesn't involve mass murder. Maria's expression softened slightly as she looked at the young ensign. Child, I've spent 15 years searching for another way. I've tried diplomatic channels that don't exist, appealed to moral authorities that don't care, and sought technological solutions that remain beyond our reach. This device represents the culmination of every alternative I could imagine. She gestured to the walls around them, which were covered with decades of research notes and failed experiments. Do you think I wanted to become the galaxy's ultimate terrorist? Do you think I enjoyed spending the best years of my life hidden in a radiation-soaked asteroid, working on weapons that could destroy civilizations? The pain in her voice was real, the weight of years spent in isolation and moral compromise. But beneath the pain was something harder, a determination forged in the fires of necessity. The hegemony gave us this choice 15 years ago, when they decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to survive. They could have chosen to work with us, to find ways for our species to coexist. Instead, they chose fear, control, and ultimately extinction. This device simply ensures that their choice applies to them as well. Torres looked up from his instruments, his expression troubled. The quantum entanglement field is stabilizing, but I'm reading some kind of interference. Something's disrupting the signal. Sarah moved to the sensor array, her training taking over despite the moral weight of their actions. We're not alone. Something's entered the nebula, and it's not human. The display showed multiple contacts moving through the electromagnetic storms with a precision that spoke of advanced technology and intimate knowledge of the nebula's patterns. Ships that shouldn't have been able to navigate the deadly radiation were converging on their position with obvious hostile intent. Hegemony? Morrison asked, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. Worse, Maria replied, her face grim as she studied the sensor readings. Those are arbiters, the hegemony's elite enforcement units. They're not here to capture us or negotiate. They're here to ensure that this facility and everyone in it simply disappears. Sarah felt ice form in her veins as she recognized the ship configurations. Arbiters were the hegemony's answer to problems that conventional military force couldn't solve. They operated outside normal command structures, with authority to take any action deemed necessary for galactic stability. How did they find us? She asked. Maria's expression was bitter. Because I taught you too well, daughter. The quantum communication you sent to Earth was intercepted and decoded. The hegemony has been watching for any sign of Ghost 7's technology for 15 years. Your message told them exactly what they needed to know. The facility's defense systems activated automatically, energy shields snapping into place around the asteroid's hull. But everyone in the laboratory knew that shields wouldn't be enough against Arbiter-class vessels. How long until the reality anchor is operational? Morrison asked. Torres checked his instruments, his hands moving frantically over unfamiliar controls. 20 minutes for basic functionality, maybe 40 for full implementation. We don't have 20 minutes, Sarah said, watching as the Arbiter ships closed the distance with ruthless efficiency. Those ships will be in weapons range in 15 minutes. Maria moved to a weapons control panel that had been hidden beneath an innocent-looking workbench. As it rose from the floor, the crew saw that the peaceful research facility had been built around a weapons platform that could rival anything in the human fleet. Then we hold them off, she said simply. Whatever it takes for as long as it takes. Humanity's survival depends on completing this device. The first enemy weapons fire lit up the nebula like artificial lightning, energy beams powerful enough to crack planets striking the facility's shields. The asteroid shuddered under the impact but held. The hidden facility shook under another devastating barrage as the Arbiter ships pressed their attack. In the laboratory, sparks flew from overloaded systems while Maria Santos fought to complete 15 years of preparation. In the minutes remaining before their defenses failed, shield generators at 60%, Torres reported, his voice strained as he tried to maintain power distribution, while explosive decompression alarms screamed throughout the facility. We can't take much more of this. Sarah stood at the weapons control station, her fingers dancing over targeting systems that responded to her touch with deadly precision. The facility's hidden armaments were beyond anything the crew had imagined. Energy weapons that could punch through arbiter armor and missile systems that bent space-time to ensure perfect accuracy. "Firing solution locked," she announced, her voice carrying the cold professionalism that had made Ghost 7 legendary. "Target their lead ship's quantum drive." The laboratory filled with brilliant light as the facility's main weapons discharged. Energy that had been building for over a decade released in a concentrated beam that crossed the void at the speed of thought. The arbiter vessel staggered under the impact, its shields flaring and failing as exotic particles tore through its hull. But the victory was momentary. 3 more arbiter ships emerged from the nebula's electromagnetic storm, their weapons already charged and targeting the facility's weakest points. "They're adapting to our shield frequencies," Morrison called out from the defensive console. "Each hit is more effective than the last." Maria looked up from the reality anchor, her hands still working on final calibrations while battle raged around her. "The quantum entanglement matrix is at 80% stability. I need 5 more minutes." "We don't have 5 minutes," Sarah replied, launching another salvo at the advancing arbiters. "Their next coordinated strike will punch through our shields." The facility lurched violently as enemy fire found its mark, explosions echoing through corridors that had known only peace for 15 years. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as life support systems struggled to maintain atmosphere in damaged sections. "Hull breach on level 7, reported Ensign Park, her training taking over despite the terror in her voice. "Compartment sealing itself, but we're losing atmosphere fast." Torres abandoned his station and moved to assist Maria with the final calibrations, his engineering expertise pushing the alien technology beyond its designed limits. "The quantum field generators are overheating. If we push them much harder, they'll destabilize and take half the facility with them." "Then we don't push them harder," Maria said calmly, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. "We give them exactly what they need and pray it's enough." Another barrage struck the facility, this one penetrating the weakened shields and scoring direct hits on the asteroid's surface. The laboratory shook so violently that several crew members were thrown to the floor, while delicate instruments sparked and failed. Sarah felt something cold and calculating settle in her mind, the same icy calm that had carried her mother through a dozen impossible missions. She abandoned the weapons console and moved to a panel that none of the crew had noticed, her fingers finding hidden controls that responded to biometric locks. "Sarah, no," Maria warned, recognizing what her daughter was preparing to do. "That system isn't ready for operational use." "Neither were you when you saved the colonies at Vega Prime," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the same deadly certainty that had made Ghost 7 a legend. "Sometimes you have to improvise." The hidden panel revealed controls for a system that defied easy categorization. Part weapons array, part dimensional manipulator. It represented the culmination of alien technology and human ingenuity. Sarah's hands moved over the controls with impossible expertise as if she had been training for this moment her entire life. "What is that?" Morrison demanded. "Insurance," Sarah said, echoing her mother's earlier words. "The kind that ensures our enemies remember why they should fear humanity." The arbiter ships closed for their final attack, weapons charging for a bombardment that would crack the asteroid and vaporize everything inside. But as they prepared to fire, space itself began to twist around the facility. The dimensional manipulator activated with a sound like reality tearing, and suddenly the arbiter ships found themselves facing not a single target, but dozens of identical facilities scattered across multiple dimensions. The enemy weapons fired, striking targets that existed and didn't exist simultaneously, their energy dissipating harmlessly across parallel realities. "Dimensional mirror field active," Sarah reported, her voice strained by the effort of controlling technology that pushed the boundaries of physics. "But I can only maintain it for a few minutes before the quantum cascade becomes unstable." Maria's hands flew over the reality anchor's final controls, years of careful preparation compressed into moments of desperate action. Quantum entanglement matrix at 95%. Targeting solutions locked on primary hegemony worlds. Fail-safe protocols engaged. The device hummed with barely contained power, its crystalline core shifting through colors that had no names in human language. Around it, space-time itself began to warp as the quantum field built toward critical mass. "Maria," Morrison said quietly, "once you activate that thing, there's no going back. The galaxy will never be the same. The galaxy was never going to be the same." Maria replied, her finger hovering over the final activation control. The only question was whether humanity would be part of its future. The Arbiter ships regrouped, their commanders adapting to the dimensional mirror field with typical hegemony efficiency. Energy weapons reconfigured to strike across multiple realities simultaneously, turning the facility's own defense against it. Mirror field destabilizing, Sarah warned, sweat beading on her forehead as she fought to maintain control. 30 seconds before cascade failure. Torres looked up from his instruments, his face pale with exhaustion and wonder. The reality anchor is ready, all quantum matrices synchronized, targeting computers online, fail-safe protocols active. Maria paused, her hand on the control that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. For a moment, she wasn't the legendary Ghost 7 or the galaxy's most wanted terrorist. She was simply a woman who had sacrificed everything to protect the species she loved. For humanity? She whispered, and activated the device. The laboratory filled with light that existed in dimensions human eyes weren't designed to perceive. The reality anchor discharged its accumulated energy in a burst that reached across space and time. Quantum threads extending to touch 47 hegemony worlds, scattered across thousands of light years. On each of those worlds, reality shifted slightly as the quantum entanglement took hold. Nothing visible changed, but the fundamental structure of space-time around their core systems, locked into a configuration that tied their continued existence to humanity's survival. The Arbiter ships suddenly stopped their attack, their weapons powering down as emergency communications flooded their command channels, messages from Hegemony Central Command, delivered with the kind of panic that suggested their leaders had just discovered checkmate. "They know," Sarah said, reading the intercepted communications. "The quantum signature is impossible to hide. Every hegemony world with advanced sensors just detected the entanglement field." Maria sagged against the reality anchor's control console, the weight of decades finally showing in her posture. "Then it's done. The galaxy now knows that humanity has the means to ensure mutual destruction on a scale that makes their bioweapons look like children's toys." The dimensional mirror field collapsed as Sarah finally released control of the manipulator, the facility returning to normal space with a sensation like falling through dimensions. The Arbiter ships hung motionless in the void, their commanders undoubtedly receiving new orders from superiors who suddenly faced a very different strategic situation. "What happens now?" Morrison asked. Maria smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a smile without shadows. "Now we go home. The hegemony will want to negotiate, to find ways to coexist with a species that can threaten their core worlds. They'll discover that humans are much more reasonable when they're not facing extinction." She moved to the communication console, her fingers finding frequencies that connected to the deepest levels of hegemony command structure. "This is Ghost 7, speaking on behalf of humanity. I believe you have some phone calls to make." The response came within minutes, a voice speaking in the formal diplomatic language of the hegemony's highest councils. "We acknowledge receipt of your demonstration. The Council requests immediate negotiations regarding the mutual security of all galactic civilizations. Negotiations will begin when your Void Reapers return to their home bases and your biowarfare ships are recalled," Maria replied. "Until then, the reality anchor remains active and targeted." The communication channel closed, leaving the laboratory in sudden quiet. The battle was over, not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through the simple application of a principle humans had perfected long before they reached the stars: peace through superior firepower. Diplomacy through mutually assured destruction. "Is it really over?" Park asked, her voice small in the sudden silence. 6 months after the reality anchor's activation, Sarah Chen stood in the briefing room of Deep Space Station Prometheus, watching holographic displays that showed a galaxy in transition. The hegemony's biowarfare ships had returned to their home ports. The Void Reapers were being retrofitted for peaceful exploration missions, and for the first time in human history, alien diplomats were requesting meetings rather than demanding submission. But peace, Sarah had learned, required constant vigilance. "The Cathera Collective is mobilizing their battle fleets," reported Commander Voss, the same officer who had recruited Sarah what felt like a lifetime ago. "Intelligence suggests they're planning to challenge the new balance of power." Sarah studied the tactical displays with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. The Cathara were a warrior species that had served as the hegemony's enforcers for centuries, and they viewed humanity's rise to galactic significance as an affront to the natural order. Fleet size and composition? She asked, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had replaced her earlier uncertainty. 12 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, and approximately 200 support vessels, Voss replied. They're calling it a training exercise, but the target coordinates place them dangerously close to the Tau Ceti colonies. Sarah nodded, her mind automatically calculating response times and strategic options. 6 months of operating as humanity's unofficial guardian had given her an education that no academy could provide. She had learned to think in terms of galactic politics, species-level psychology, and the delicate balance between deterrence and provocation. Recommendations from the Joint Chiefs? She asked. They want to scramble the Third Fleet and establish a defensive perimeter around our colonies, Voss said. Standard military response to a potential threat, which would be exactly what the Cathara want, Sarah replied, understanding the deeper game being played. They're testing our resolve, trying to determine if we'll react to military posturing with military posturing. If we deploy the Third Fleet, they can claim we're the aggressors and rally other species to their cause. She manipulated the holographic display, showing the Cathara fleet movements alongside intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The pattern was clear to someone trained to see beneath surface appearances. This wasn't a simple military exercise, but part of a coordinated effort to undermine humanity's newfound position. The Zhek Empire has increased patrols along our border regions, she continued, highlighting additional fleet movements. The Saurian Confederacy has recalled their ambassadors for consultations, and 3 minor species have suddenly discovered urgent domestic issues that prevent them from attending next month's trade negotiations. Voss studied the data with growing concern. You think this is coordinated? I know it's coordinated, Sarah replied. The question is whether it's being coordinated by the species themselves or by someone else, someone who benefits from renewed conflict in this sector. She activated another display, this one showing economic data that painted a disturbing picture. Weapons sales had increased by 400% in the past month, all traced back to shell companies with connections to a particular region of space. The Gren Arms Consortium, she said, highlighting the relevant data streams. They're selling weapons to everyone, including some of the same species that are now mobilizing against us. Someone's playing both sides, stirring up conflict to increase their profits. The Gren are supposed to be neutral traders, Voss protested. They've maintained that status for over a century. They were neutral when the hegemony controlled galactic politics, Sarah corrected. Now that humanity has upset the balance of power, neutrality isn't as profitable as it used to be. They're betting that if they can restart the shooting war, they'll make enough from weapon sales to buy their own empire. She closed the tactical displays and activated a communication channel that connected to the deepest levels of human intelligence. The response came within seconds, a voice she recognized from months of clandestine operations. Control. This is Ghost 8 requesting authorization for deep insertion operation, she said, using the code name that had become hers by right of inheritance and necessity. Authorization granted, came the reply. What do you need? Transport to Gren space, full stealth configuration, and a team with expertise in economic warfare, Sarah said. If we're going to stop this war before it starts, we need to remove the profit motive. She turned back to Voss, her expression carrying the weight of decisions that would affect billions of lives. Inform the Joint Chiefs that the Third Fleet should maintain current positions, but begin discreet readiness preparations. If shooting starts, we'll need to respond immediately, but with any luck it won't come to that. What are you planning? Voss asked. Sarah's smile carried echoes of her mother's legendary ruthlessness. The Gren want to profit from war? I'm going to show them that some wars aren't profitable for anyone. 3 days later, Sarah found herself aboard a stealth transport that officially didn't exist, heading toward Gren space with a team of specialists whose skills ranged from electronic warfare to psychological manipulation. The ship itself was a masterpiece of human engineering, incorporating alien technology that Maria Santos had helped acquire during her years as Ghost 7. Target coordinates confirmed, reported Lieutenant Kim, the team's navigation specialist. Gren Central Trading Hub, approximately 6 hours to insertion point. Sarah studied the intelligence files on their destination, a massive space station that served as the hub for Gren commercial operations across 3 sectors. It was heavily defended, constantly monitored, and supposedly impregnable to any form of infiltration, which made it the perfect target for the kind of operation Ghost 7 had pioneered. "Remember," Sarah told her team as they prepared their equipment, "we're not here to destroy anything or hurt anyone. We're here to deliver a message that the Gren Arms Consortium will understand perfectly." The message was elegant in its simplicity. Comprehensive economic data, showing exactly what would happen to their profits if galactic war resumed, analysis of refugee patterns, trade route disruptions, and the tendency of desperate species to default on their debts rather than pay for weapons they could no longer afford. But the real message was in the delivery method itself. The fact that a human team could penetrate their most secure facility, access their most classified financial records, and leave without being detected would demonstrate that the Gren had seriously underestimated their new neighbors. "Stealth systems active," reported the pilot as they approached the trading hub. "We're invisible to their sensors, but that won't help if someone looks out a window at the wrong time." The insertion went flawlessly, a testament to months of planning and the kind of technology that turned impossible missions into merely improbable ones. Sarah's team moved through the station's service corridors like ghosts, their presence masked by devices that bent light and sound around them. The Gren Arms Consortium's central data core was protected by security measures that would have challenged even advanced military forces. Energy fields that could cut through starship armor, detection grids sensitive enough to register individual molecules, and automated defenses that could track and eliminate targets moving at the speed of sound. Sarah bypassed them all using techniques her mother had taught her during childhood. Games that she only now understood had been training exercises. "Data. Package delivered," she reported as her team's specialist completed the download that would reshape Gren economic planning for the next decade. Financial records accessed, profit projections updated, and a few additional surprises left for their leadership to discover. The surprises included detailed intelligence on every illegal weapons sale the Gren had conducted over the past 5 years, complete with evidence that would interest several galactic law enforcement agencies. It also included economic models showing exactly how much money they would lose if certain trade routes became unavailable due to increased human patrols. "Extraction complete," reported Kim as they slipped back through the station's corridors. "No alarms, no detection, no evidence of our presence except for what we chose to leave behind." The return journey gave Sarah time to monitor the results of their operation. Within hours of their departure, emergency meetings were being called throughout Gren leadership. Weapons shipments were being quietly canceled, and several arms dealers discovered that their most profitable contracts had suddenly become legal liabilities. But the real victory came 12 hours later, when the Cathara fleet received new orders from their government. The training exercise was canceled, the ships were recalled to home ports, and diplomatic channels opened to discuss new trade agreements that didn't involve weapons sales. "How did you know they would back down?" Voss asked when Sarah reported the mission's success. "Because I understood their psychology," Sarah replied. "Warriors like the Cathara respect strength, but they also respect intelligence. When they realized that humanity could strike at the economic foundations of their military buildup without firing a shot, they understood that we weren't just lucky primitives who had stumbled onto advanced weapons." 1 year after the reality anchor changed the balance of galactic power, Sarah Chen stood before the assembled representatives of 47 species in the newly constructed Unity Station, humanity's first permanent embassy to the greater galactic community. The irony wasn't lost on her that the woman once known as Ghost 8 was now representing her species in the most public forum the galaxy had ever created, the Hegemony Council. Chamber had been redesigned to accommodate the new reality of interspecies relations, where once a handful of dominant species had dictated terms to lesser civilizations, now hundreds of worlds sent representatives to participate in decisions that affected them all. It was messy, chaotic, and gloriously democratic in a way that the galaxy had never experienced. "The proposal before us today," announced the Zeridian speaker, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, "concerns the establishment of mutual defense protocols that would protect developing civilizations from exploitation by more advanced species." Sarah listened to the debate, with half her attention while monitoring intelligence, feeds that painted a picture of a galaxy still, adjusting to its new paradigm. The formal end of the hegemony's dominance had created opportunities for dozens of species to emerge from the shadows, but it had also created new forms of instability as old alliances crumbled and new ones formed. "The Terran representative has the floor," the speaker announced. Sarah rose from her seat, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes from dozens of different species. 6 months of diplomatic training had taught her the formal protocols, but her real education had come from operations that most of the beings in this chamber would never know about. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems, "humanity supports this proposal not just as a matter of principle, but as a matter of practical necessity. A galaxy where the strong prey upon the weak is a galaxy that will inevitably consume itself in endless conflict." She activated a holographic display that showed historical data spanning the past century. The records show that periods of galactic stability correlate directly with the protection of smaller civilizations. When developing species are allowed to grow and contribute to galactic civilization, everyone benefits from their innovations and perspectives. The Cathera ambassador, a warrior whose scars spoke of decades of combat, raised a clawed hand. "The Terran speaks of protection, but her own species rose to prominence through the threat of mutually assured destruction. How do we know that humanity won't simply become the new dominant power, replacing the hegemony's control with their own?" Sarah had been expecting this question for months. "Because we've already had that opportunity and chosen not to take it. The reality anchor gives humanity the power to destroy any civilization in this chamber, but we've used that power only to ensure that no one can destroy us. We could have demanded tribute, seized territory, or imposed our will on others. Instead, we're here, participating in democratic processes and advocating for the rights of species we've never even met." She manipulated the display to show current fleet deployments and trade agreements. "Human military forces remain within our own borders, except when invited to assist with humanitarian crises. Our trade agreements are based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation, and our diplomatic initiatives focus on creating systems that benefit everyone rather than just ourselves." A new voice spoke from the gallery, belonging to an ambassador from one of the species that had emerged from hegemony oppression. "The Jackson people remember when hegemony forces devastated our homeworld for refusing to provide forced labor. Terran ships arrived not to conquer but to provide medical aid and help us rebuild. Why would a species capable of destroying us instead choose to help us?" Sarah smiled, remembering the mission that had taken her team to the Jackson system. It had been one of many operations where humanity had chosen to project soft power rather than military might, building relationships based on trust rather than fear. "Because we understand something that the hegemony never learned," she replied. "True security doesn't come from making others fear you. It comes from making others want to protect you. A galaxy where humans are seen as helpful neighbors is far safer for humanity than a galaxy where we're seen as potential tyrants." The debate continued for hours, covering everything from trade regulations to military cooperation protocols. Sarah participated fully, but part of her attention remained focused on the intelligence feeds that showed a galaxy still full of threats that couldn't be addressed through formal diplomacy: pirates, who preyed on civilian shipping in ungoverned space, criminal organizations that trafficked in sentient beings, rogue military units from fallen regimes that continued their wars long after their governments had ceased to exist. The kind of problems that required responses from people who didn't officially exist. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Sarah felt her communication implant activate with a coded message, mission parameters, target coordinates, and authorization codes that meant another threat had emerged that required Ghost 8's attention. "Ambassador Chen," called the Zeridian speaker as Sarah gathered her materials. "A word, if you please." Sarah approached the speaker's dais, noting the subtle changes in the alien's crystalline structure that indicated heightened emotional states. In the months since taking her diplomatic post, she had learned to read the body language of dozens of species, a skill that proved invaluable in both formal negotiations and covert operations. "You carry yourself differently than other diplomats," the speaker observed, her voice resonating with harmonic overtones that suggested deep curiosity. "There's a watchfulness about you as if you're always prepared for violence." Sarah chose her words carefully. My species has learned that peace requires constant vigilance. We've seen what happens when civilizations become complacent about their security. The speaker's form shifted through several color patterns before settling on a configuration that suggested approval. The Zeridian collective has existed for over 10,000 years. In that time, we have seen many species rise to prominence and fall back into obscurity. But we have never seen a species gain such power and immediately begin working to limit their own ability to abuse it. Power without restraint is just another form of chaos, Sarah replied. Humanity learned that lesson the hard way during our own history. Indeed. The speaker paused, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lighting into new patterns. There are rumors, Ambassador, whispers of human operatives who work in the spaces between official policy, handling threats that formal diplomacy cannot address. Some say these operatives carry the designation of ancient Terran myths, becoming legends themselves. Sarah maintained her diplomatic expression, though inwardly she wondered how much the Zeridians actually knew. Every civilization has its legends, speaker. Some are based on truth, others on hope, and most on the need to believe that someone is watching over the innocent. And if such operatives existed, the speaker continued, what would you say to concerns that they represent a shadow government that undermines the democratic processes we're trying to build? The question cut to the heart of Sarah's greatest moral struggle. How do you protect democracy from threats that democracy itself cannot address? How do you preserve freedom while operating in the shadows that freedom creates? I would say that democracy is a precious thing, Sarah replied finally. So precious that it's worth protecting from those who would destroy it, even if that protection sometimes requires actions that don't appear in official records. The greatest service to democratic ideals is ensuring that democracy survives to see another day. The speaker's form shifted again, cycling through patterns that suggested deep thought. A fascinating perspective, Ambassador. I hope your species continues to remember the difference between protection and control. So do I, Speaker. So do I. As Sarah left the diplomatic complex and headed toward the secure transport that would take her to her next mission, she reflected on the impossible balance she had inherited from her mother. Ghost 7 had saved humanity by becoming its greatest criminal. Ghost 8 was trying to save galactic civilization by becoming its most invisible guardian. The mission briefing revealed another crisis in the making. A criminal syndicate was using stolen hegemony bioweapons to hold civilian populations hostage, demanding territorial concessions that would destabilize an entire sector. 3 species had already fallen to their extortion, and more would follow unless someone intervened. Official military response was impossible without triggering a war between multiple species. Diplomatic negotiations were pointless when dealing with criminals who had nothing to lose. But a small team with the right skills could infiltrate the syndicate's operations, neutralize the bioweapons, and ensure that justice was served without anyone knowing who had served it. As her transport left Unity Station behind and headed for the Outer Rim, Sarah thought about the speech she had given in the council chamber. She had spoken about humanity's choice to use its power responsibly, to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than exploit. What she hadn't mentioned was the price of that choice. The nights spent in hostile territory, the